The sun was setting over the wide open plains when a little girl wandered down the dusty trail alone. Her name was Clara, though no one in the nearby town knew that yet. The wind brushed through her tangled hair as she clutched a small broken locket to her chest. Her dress, once light blue, was now faded brown from the dirt and dust of the road. She walked slowly, her tiny feet bare and sore, her eyes searching the horizon for something, or someone, who might never come back. The trail stretched for miles across golden fields and dry hills. A few wagons had passed earlier that day, but most travelers were in a hurry to reach the next town before nightfall. When they saw the child walking alone, they slowed their horses, looked, whispered to each other, and moved on. Some felt pity. Others were simply afraid to get involved. Life on the frontier was already hard enough. Everyone carried their own struggles, their own losses. Taking in a child with no family and no answers was a burden few were ready to bear. Clara didn't understand much of that. She only knew that her world had changed. The people who used to laugh beside her, the hands that held hers, were gone. She remembered flashes, her mother's kind smile, her father's tall shadow as he lifted her onto the wagon, the way her little brother had cried when the wheels hit a rock. But now all that was left was silence, the endless hum of wind through the grass, and the ache in her heart that something was missing forever. By the time she reached the edge of the small cattle town, the light was almost gone. The sky glowed orange and pink, and the air was cool. Her small frame looked even smaller against the backdrop of the wide-open land. The town was quiet except for the faint sound of a piano playing inside the saloon, and the creak of a wooden sign swinging in the breeze. Dogs barked in the distance, and a few lamps flickered to life along the main street. Clara stopped and looked around. She didn't know where she was or where to go. She stood beside a wooden post, unsure if she should knock on a door or keep walking. A woman passing by with a basket of bread noticed her and paused. "Where are your folks, child?" she asked kindly. But Clara didn't answer. She just stared at the road behind her, the way she had come, as if expecting her family to appear at any moment. The woman hesitated, then sighed softly. "Poor thing," she murmured and went inside, promising herself she'd tell someone later. Not long after, Sheriff Daniels, a tall man with kind eyes and a gray mustache, came walking down the street. He had seen many things in his years keeping peace in that town, but the sight of a little girl alone on the road made him stop in his tracks. "Well now," he said gently, kneeling beside her. "Where's your ma and pa, sweetheart?" Again she said nothing. Her lips trembled, but no words came out. The sheriff noticed the way her hands shook, the way her dress hung loosely on her thin frame. He stood up and looked around. "Anybody know this child?" he called out. A few townsfolk peeked from their doors and windows. The saloon keeper came to the porch, wiping his hands on his apron. "Never seen her before," he said. "She came from the west, I think. Saw her walking past the old trail this morning." A murmur passed through the crowd. Some whispered about an overturned wagon spotted days ago far out near the ridge. Others just shook their heads. Life could change so quickly out here, and tragedies were not uncommon. The sheriff gently took Clara's hand. "Come on, little one," he said softly. "We'll find you a place to rest." She followed quietly, her steps small and tired. They went to the church first, where Miss June, the schoolteacher, helped the sheriff wash Clara's face and give her something warm to eat. Clara held the spoon awkwardly, her hands trembling with each bite. The soup was plain but comforting, and after days of hunger, it tasted like heaven. Miss June tried to ask questions. What her name was, where she came from, what had happened, but Clara only whispered one word. "Mama." It was the only word she seemed able to say. When asked again, she just pressed the locket to her chest and shook her head. Inside the locket was a faded picture of a smiling woman with soft eyes, her mother. The hinges were broken, and the glass was cracked, but it was the only piece of her old life she had left. That night, Clara slept on a small cot in the corner of the church. The candles flickered softly and the air smelled of wood and wax. Miss June covered her with a blanket and watched her for a moment before whispering a quiet prayer. Outside, the sheriff spoke with a few townspeople about what to do next. Some suggested sending her to the next town, where there was an orphanage. Others thought someone local should take her in for the night. But when morning came, no one had stepped forward. Days turned into weeks, and still no family came for Clara. The sheriff posted word at nearby towns. and riders spread the message up and down the trail. But no one claimed her. The townspeople gave her bits of food and clothes, but they were poor themselves. Sometimes the saloon keeper's wife, Mrs. Harper, would give her bread and tell her stories about angels watching over lost children. Clara listened quietly but never smiled. Every afternoon she walked to the edge of town, sat on a rock and watched the same trail she had arrived on, as if believing her mother and father would ride up any moment and take her home. The people began to call her the Trail Girl. Children whispered stories about her at school, that she had been sent by angels, or that she could talk to the wind. But most grown-ups simply pitied her. They would nod politely when she passed, but didn't know what to say. She became a quiet part of the town, like an echo of something forgotten yet still present. Then one afternoon, while the sheriff was speaking with a ranch hand at the general store, he looked out the window and saw Clara sitting once again by the road. The wind was stronger that day, blowing dust across the street. She didn't move, didn't blink, just sat staring down the long trail as if she could see something far away. The sheriff sighed. "That poor child," he said. "She's waiting for something that's never coming." The ranch hand nodded. "Sometimes waiting's all a person can do," he replied, "till life decides to move 'em along." The sheriff watched for a long moment, thinking how strange it was that a little girl could carry so much sorrow in silence. He wondered if she would ever speak more than a single word again, or if the trail had taken her voice along with her family. That night, the sky was clear, and stars blanketed the plains. Clara lay awake, looking out the church window at the dark sky. She whispered softly to herself, the same prayer her mother used to say, "Keep me safe, and bring me home." The wind outside seemed to answer, brushing softly through the trees, carrying a promise she couldn't quite hear. In the days to come, life in the town went on as usual. Wagons rolled through, ranchers traded cattle, and children played in the schoolyard. But Clara remained a small mystery. Some thought she would be taken away soon. Others said the sheriff would find someone kind enough to keep her. No one guessed that her story was only beginning, and that her path would soon cross with the wealthiest cowboy in the county, a man whose heart had been silent for years. And so as the sun set once again over the plains, Clara sat by the dusty road, the broken locket still in her hand, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She didn't know it yet, but her lonely waiting was about to lead her to the place she truly belonged, and to the man who would one day call her daughter. The morning sun rose over the small cattle town, painting the sky with soft shades of gold and pink. Life had already begun to stir. The blacksmith's hammer rang in the distance, the smell of bread drifted from the bakery, and a few ranchers rode through the main street with sleepy horses. Among them, little Clara sat quietly on the church steps, holding the same locket close to her chest. Her eyes were calm but distant, like someone who had forgotten how to dream. Though the townspeople had grown used to her presence, they still didn't quite know what to do about her. The sheriff had asked every family if they could take her in, even for a little while. Most had kind hearts, but their lives were hard. The drought had made food scarce, and every home already had more mouths to feed than it could handle. "Poor child," they would say, "she needs someone better off than us." And so another day would pass, and Clara would sleep once more in the back room of the church. Miss June, the school teacher, tried her best to bring comfort. She would bring Clara to the small classroom behind the chapel and show her letters and drawings. "This is the letter C," she would say softly, tracing it with her chalk. "It's the first letter of your name, Clara." The girl watched but rarely spoke. Sometimes she would copy the letters carefully, her handwriting small and neat, but her face never changed. When other children arrived for lessons, they would glance at Clara, whisper, and giggle. She didn't seem to notice. She sat in the last row, her little hands folded on the desk, her gaze often lost out the window where the long trail disappeared into the hills. It was as if her heart was still walking that road, searching for the past. The people in town grew to think of her as a quiet ghost of the trail, always there, never speaking much, yet impossible to ignore. Sheriff Daniels visited every few days, bringing her apples or a warm roll from the bakery. "How are you holding up, sweetheart?" he'd ask gently. Clara would nod once and whisper, "I'm fine," though everyone knew she wasn't. The sheriff wished he could do more, but his own small cabin barely had enough space for himself and his old hound. Still, he made a silent promise that he would find her a home, a real one, before the next winter came. Weeks passed. The leaves began to turn gold and fall from the trees. One chilly afternoon, the sound of hooves thundered down the main road. The townsfolk looked up from their chores. Dust swirled as a group of riders approached, strong men on fine horses driving a herd of cattle ahead of them. At the front of the group rode a man the whole county knew by name, Samuel Whitlock, the wealthiest cowboy for miles around. Samuel was a tall man, dressed in a clean white shirt and worn leather coat. His eyes were steady, gray like storm clouds, and his beard neatly trimmed. Everyone in town respected him, but few truly knew him. He owned more land than anyone else and was said to have a fortune hidden away in his ranch house beyond the hills. But what people remembered most was not his wealth, it was his loss. Years ago, he had a wife named Evelyn and a little daughter named Mary. They had been the joy of his life, the light of his home. Then one harsh winter, illness came through the valley. When spring returned, both were gone. Since then, Samuel had changed. He became quiet, distant, and poured his heart only into his work. People said he had no room left in his soul for love or laughter. When he rode into town that day, everyone watched from doorways and windows. He greeted the sheriff with a short nod, paid his men at the general store, and began loading supplies. He seemed just as serious as always, polite but cold, kind but unreachable. Meanwhile, Clara stood across the street near the water trough, her small figure half hidden behind the post. She watched the horses curiously, their manes shining in the sunlight. The men laughed and talked, but she only noticed one, the tall man with the gray eyes who seemed too quiet for the noise around him. As Samuel finished his business, he noticed her too. At first he thought she was just another child from town, but there was something about her that made him pause. Maybe it was the way she stood so still, or the way her eyes looked, deep, tired, and older than her years. Something inside him stirred, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. He looked toward the sheriff. "Who's that little one?" he asked. The sheriff followed his gaze and sighed. "That's Clara. Found her months ago on the trail alone. Never found her folks." Samuel frowned slightly. "She lives here?" "Mostly stays at the church," the sheriff said. "We look after her best we can." Samuel nodded but said nothing more. He mounted his horse and turned to leave. But as he passed the end of the street, he saw Clara again, this time sitting on a rock by the road, the same spot she always chose. The wind blew softly, lifting strands of her hair. She held something small in her hand, turning it over gently, her broken locket. Something inside Samuel shifted. For a moment he thought he saw his own daughter's face in that child. The same innocence, the same quiet sadness. He tried to look away but couldn't. He pulled on the reins, stopping his horse. The men behind him slowed, confused. Samuel stared at the little girl, lost in thought. He didn't speak to her that day, but when he returned to his ranch that night, her image stayed in his mind. He found himself thinking of her as he sat by the fire, the same way he used to think of his own daughter before bedtime. He shook his head, telling himself it was just pity. Yet deep down he knew it was something more. A strange pull of the heart that he couldn't explain. Back in town, Clara's days continued quietly. The people were kind in their own ways, but kindness without warmth can still feel cold. When she walked through the market, women smiled but didn't invite her to stay. When children played, they waved but didn't ask her to join. She was always on the edge of things, never forgotten, yet never truly included. Sometimes she would visit the bakery, and Mrs. Harper would give her a roll of bread and say, "You'll find your place someday, dear." Clara would smile faintly and whisper, "Thank you," but her eyes would drift back to the dusty road. That road still held her heart. Then one chilly morning, a letter arrived at the sheriff's office. It was from Samuel Whitlock. He wrote that he needed a few hands in town to help with repairs on his ranch. And at the bottom of the letter, in neat handwriting, he added a single line. "If the child from the trail still needs a home, I can offer one." When the sheriff read it aloud, Miss June covered her mouth in surprise. "Do you think he means it?" she asked. "I think he does," the sheriff replied. "And if anyone can give that girl a better life, it's him." The next day, he told Clara about the offer. She looked at him quietly, unsure what to feel. "Will there be horses?" she asked softly. Yes, the sheriff said with a small smile. Plenty of them. She nodded, her eyes thoughtful. She didn't say yes right away, but something about the thought of open land and a warm home made her heart flutter. Maybe, just maybe, she could start again. That evening, Samuel rode into town once more. When he stopped in front of the church, Clara stood there waiting, her little hands folded, her eyes wide. He dismounted slowly, his boots pressing softly against the dirt. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, the lonely child from the trail and the lonely cowboy from the hills. Samuel bent slightly and said in a gentle, rough voice, "You must be Clara." She nodded. He smiled faintly. "Well, Clara, how'd you like to come see the ranch?" She hesitated, then reached out her small hand toward his. Her fingers trembled as they touched his rough palm. Samuel felt a warmth spread through his chest that he hadn't felt in years. He lifted her gently onto his horse and looked toward the sheriff. "I'll take care of her," he said simply. And as they rode out of town together, the people watched in silence, unsure whether to call it luck, fate, or something greater. But one thing was clear. The quiet girl from the trail had finally found someone willing to ride beside her, and her story was about to change forever. The long trail leading to Whitlock Ranch stretched across open land, golden under the morning sun. The air smelled of grass, dust, and fresh wind. Clara sat quietly on the horse in front of Samuel Whitlock, her small hands holding the saddle horn tightly. The ride was smooth but endless, the fields rolling out like an ocean of gold and green. She had never been so far from town before. Every sound, the clop of hooves, the low moo of distant cattle, the call of meadow birds, felt new and strange. Samuel kept a steady pace, glancing at her now and then. She didn't speak much, but he could tell she was watching everything carefully. The fences, the windmills, even the clouds drifting above the hills. She had the sharp, curious eyes of someone who saw the world differently, not just with sight but with wonder and longing. It reminded him painfully of his own daughter, Mary, who used to ride with him along the same trail, asking endless questions about everything. They reached the ranch by noon. It was vast and quiet, with a big white house standing proudly on the hill. Horses grazed nearby and ranch hands worked in the distance, fixing fences and carrying hay. The smell of fresh bread came from the kitchen window. A few dogs barked playfully when they arrived, running in circles around the horse. Samuel helped Clara down. "Welcome home," he said softly. She looked up at the big house, unsure. "Is this really my home?" she asked in a small voice. "For as long as you want it to be," he answered. The ranch hands watched from a distance, whispering to each other. Most of them had worked for Samuel for years and had never seen him bring anyone home. He had always been a man of few words and steady work, a man who kept his feelings locked away. But now, with this little girl beside him, something seemed different, gentler, quieter. Even the ranch dog sensed it, following Clara around with friendly tails wagging. Inside the house, Martha, the housekeeper, stood waiting. She was a tall, strong woman with silver hair tied neatly under her scarf. Her eyebrows rose when she saw the girl. "Well, I'll be," she said. "Mr. Whitlock, you've gone and brought home a child." Samuel nodded. "Her name's Clara. She'll be staying with us." Martha softened instantly. "Oh, bless her. Come here, sweetie. Let's get you washed up." Clara followed her shyly, still holding her locket. The house smelled of soap, biscuits, and polished wood. The rooms were wide and quiet, with sunlight streaming through tall windows. On one wall hung a framed painting of a smiling woman and a little girl, Samuel's late wife and daughter. Clara stopped and looked at it for a long moment. Martha noticed and gently touched her shoulder. "That's Mr. Whitlock's family," she said softly. "They were very dear to him." Clara nodded. "They look kind." When she was clean and dressed in one of Martha's old aprons, Samuel invited her to sit at the table. A bowl of stew and warm bread waited for her. She ate slowly, still glancing around the large room. Samuel sat across from her, stirring his coffee. The silence between them was soft, not uncomfortable, just quiet, like two souls learning each other's rhythm. After lunch, Samuel showed her the stables. The horses neighed softly as she stepped closer. "They won't hurt you," he said gently. "They just want to say hello." Clara reached out her small hand to touch a horse's nose. It snorted and she giggled, a sound so light and unexpected that Samuel's heart warmed instantly. It was the first time he had heard her laugh. He smiled without realizing it, and the foreman watching from afar whispered, Well, the boss just smiled. As the days passed, Clara began to settle in. She explored every corner of the ranch, always careful, always quiet. She helped Martha fold laundry, fed scraps to the dogs, and sometimes sat on the porch drawing shapes in the dust with a stick. The wide-open sky made her feel small but safe. At night, she would peek through her window and watch the stars, whispering her mother's prayer, "Keep me safe, and bring me home." Samuel often stood outside the house at those same hours, staring at the same stars. He didn't say it out loud, but he wondered if maybe, just maybe, this little girl had been sent to remind him what home really meant. Still, there were moments of awkwardness. Clara didn't talk much, and Samuel didn't know how to talk to children anymore. Sometimes he would try to start a conversation and end up silent halfway through. Other times, she would look at him with wide, thoughtful eyes and ask questions he didn't know how to answer. "Why is the sky so big here?" she asked one evening. He thought for a moment. "Maybe so we don't forget how small our troubles are," he said. She smiled softly as if that made perfect sense. One morning, a storm rolled over the hills. The wind howled and the rain poured down hard. The ranch hands hurried to move the horses into shelter. Samuel ran to the barn, shouting instructions. Clara watched from the porch, frightened by the thunder. When a flash of lightning brightened the sky, she gasped and ran toward the barn, calling out, "Mr. Whitlock." He turned and saw her drenched, standing in the doorway. Her face was pale, but her eyes were full of worry. "I wanted to help," she said in a trembling voice. Samuel walked over and knelt beside her. "You're safe now," he said softly. "Come on, let's get you dry." He wrapped her in a warm blanket by the fire. Martha brought her hot cocoa and fussed over her like a mother hen. Samuel sat nearby, watching the flames dance. Clara leaned against the armchair, her eyes slowly closing. For the first time in years, Samuel felt something peaceful in his home, something that had been missing since the day he lost his family. After that day, the bond between them grew stronger. Samuel started taking her along when he checked the fences or fed the horses. He showed her how to pour grain, how to brush a horse's mane, and how to whistle a tune to calm them. Clara learned quickly, and her laughter began to echo around the ranch more often. Even the ranch hands found themselves smiling whenever she ran past with her little boots and ribboned hair. One evening, while they watched the sunset together, Samuel noticed the locket around her neck. "That's a fine trinket," he said gently. "May I see it?" She hesitated, then handed it to him. Inside was the faded picture of her mother. Samuel studied it for a moment, then carefully closed it and handed it back. "She looks like she loved you very much," he said. Clara nodded, her eyes glistening. "She did. I think she still does, dimmer from the sky." Samuel's throat tightened. He reached out and patted her hand gently. "I believe you're right." Days turned into weeks, and soon the ranch wasn't just Samuel's anymore, and it felt alive again. Flowers bloomed near the porch where Clara planted seeds with Martha. The kitchen filled with laughter again. Even the old piano that had gathered dust for years found new music when Clara pressed its keys one rainy afternoon. Samuel stood in the doorway listening, remembering the way his wife used to play. His eyes softened. For the first time in a long while, the sound didn't hurt. It healed. Still, not everyone understood the change. Some folks in town whispered that Samuel was acting strangely, that he had grown too attached to the child. Others said he was just lonely. But Samuel didn't care what they said. He knew what he felt. A quiet peace he hadn't known in years. One crisp morning, as the mist lifted from the fields, Samuel saddled 2 horses. "Come on, Clara," he called with a smile. "Let's go for a ride." She hesitated. "I've never ridden before." "That's all right," he said kindly. "We'll go slow." He lifted her onto the gentle mare, guiding her reins carefully. As they rode across the meadow, the sunlight bathed the land in gold. Clara laughed, her hair flying behind her. Samuel smiled, not the polite smile he gave others, but a real one, deep and warm. In that moment, something shifted between them. The silence between a man who had lost everything and a girl who had nothing turned into something new. Belonging. That evening, as the sun sank low, Samuel stood on the porch, watching Clara chase fireflies with the dogs. For the first time in many years, he whispered a prayer, not for himself, but for her. "Thank you," he murmured to the quiet wind, "for bringing her here." And somewhere deep in the stillness of the land, it felt as though the wind whispered back. She was never lost. She was on her way home. Life at Whitlock Ranch soon settled into a gentle rhythm, though it was not always easy for little Clara. The wide open land, the animals, and the sounds of the ranch were all so different from the quiet church and narrow streets she had known before. Each day brought something new to learn, and sometimes something to fear. In the beginning, she found the horses especially frightening. They were tall, strong, and full of energy. Whenever one neighed loudly or kicked its hoof against the wooden fence, she would jump and hide behind the nearest post. The ranch hands tried not to laugh, but their smiles didn't go unnoticed. Samuel Whitlock, who was never one to raise his voice, simply said, "She'll come around. Give her time." And time did its work, slowly, kindly. Each morning, Samuel would rise before the sun and find Clara already awake, sitting by the window with her locket in her hand. "You're an early bird," he would say with a small grin. She would nod and answer softly, "I like to see the morning light." That light, golden and warm, seemed to comfort her. It painted her face with peace. Martha, the housekeeper, had quickly grown fond of Clara too. She often said, "That child has an old soul, like she's seen more of life than most grown folks." Together they baked biscuits, fed the chickens, and hung laundry under the wide blue sky. Clara listened to Martha's stories about the early days of the ranch, how Samuel and his wife had built the house with their own hands, how laughter once filled every room. Clara never asked what had happened, but she could feel the sadness still floating through the air, like a shadow that hadn't completely gone away. The first few weeks were hard. Clara often dreamed of her mother, waking in the night with quiet tears on her cheeks. Sometimes she wandered to the porch, wrapping herself in a blanket, and looked out at the stars. Samuel would find her there and sit beside her, saying nothing. They would just sit in silence, listening to the crickets and the soft rustle of wind through the grass. One night he whispered, "You know, when I miss someone I love, I talk to the stars. I believe they listen." Clara looked up at the sky and nodded. "Then maybe my mama hears me too." "I think she does," Samuel said quietly. The next day, Clara began helping in small ways around the ranch. She carried water buckets to the stable, brushed the horses' coats, and even helped Samuel's dog, Rusty, fetch tools from the shed. Every time she accomplished something new, her face lit up with pride. Samuel would watch her from a distance, feeling something in his chest he hadn't felt in years. Hope. But not everyone believed this arrangement would last. Some of the ranch hands whispered among themselves. "She's a sweet girl," one said, "but she don't belong here. Mr. Whitlock ain't the fatherly kind." Another added, "It's just pity, that's all. Once the novelty wears off, he'll send her away." Martha overheard them one afternoon and gave them a firm look. "You boys keep your talk to yourselves," she warned. "That man's got more heart than you think." Still, the doubts lingered like dust that wouldn't quite settle. Samuel himself sometimes wondered if he was doing the right thing. He had promised to care for her, but he knew caring for a child meant more than feeding and sheltering. It meant love, real love, and he wasn't sure he remembered how to give that anymore. He feared he might fail her, just as life had failed him once before. One morning, while repairing a fence, he saw Clara standing near the corral, watching the horses again. He could tell she wanted to go closer, but was still afraid. Setting his tools aside, he walked over and said gently, "They won't hurt you, Clara. They just want to know you." She frowned slightly. "They're too big. What if they get angry?" "Horses only get uneasy when we are," he explained. "If you're calm, they'll trust you." He took her hand and led her to a gentle mare named Daisy. "She's the calmest one we've got," he said softly. "Try touching her nose." Clara hesitated, her hand trembling. But when Daisy leaned forward, breathing warmly against her palm, she smiled. "She's soft," she whispered. Samuel chuckled. "Told you." That day became a turning point. Clara began spending more time in the stables, feeding, brushing, and even talking to the horses as if they were old friends. The ranch hands started calling her Little Miss Sunshine, because her laughter, once rare, now filled the air. Yet as her bond with the ranch deepened, so did her worries. One evening she asked Samuel softly, "What if someone comes and takes me away?" He looked surprised. "Why would you think that?" "Because I don't really belong here," she said. "I'm just staying." Samuel knelt beside her. "Clara," he said gently, "you're not just staying. You're part of this place now. You belong here as much as the sky belongs above us." Her eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, she threw her arms around him. It was an awkward hug, stiff, unexpected, but it melted something inside him. He placed a hand on her back, feeling a warmth spread through his heart like sunlight after a storm. From then on, the ranch began to change in quiet ways. The big house, once silent, was now alive with small sounds. The creak of Clara's footsteps, her soft singing while she helped Martha cook, and the echo of laughter in the hallway. Samuel even found himself humming again while he worked, something he hadn't done in years. Still, not everything was easy. Clara was shy around strangers, and whenever visitors came to the ranch, she hid behind Samuel or Martha. Once, during a large cattle delivery, she dropped a basket of tools and ran off in fright when one of the men shouted across the yard. Samuel found her crying behind the barn. "They were just being loud, not angry," he said softly. "But I know it's hard when things get noisy," she sniffed. "I didn't mean to make trouble." "You didn't," he assured her. "Everyone gets scared sometimes. Even cowboys." She looked up surprised. "Even you?" he smiled. "Especially me." Over time, Clara grew stronger. She learned how to tie knots, saddle a horse, and bake pies with Martha's help. She wrote her name neatly in a notebook Samuel bought for her, and practiced reading from old storybooks. Her favorite was one about a bird that got lost and found its way home again. "That's like me," she told him one night sitting by the fire. "Maybe," he said, smiling. "But I think the bird didn't just find home, it made one." Months passed and winter came. Snow covered the fields like a white blanket, and the ranch felt peaceful. On Christmas Eve, Martha decorated the mantel with candles and pine cones. Clara made Samuel a small gift, a tiny wooden heart she carved with the help of one of the ranch hands. When she gave it to him, she said shyly, "So you don't forget me." He looked at her with gentle eyes. "Forget you? Not a chance." He hung the little heart above the fireplace next to his family's photo. For the first time, it didn't feel like the picture belonged to the past. It felt like the start of something new. But just when everything seemed right, a shadow of uncertainty returned. One bright spring morning, a stranger rode into the ranch, a traveler from a nearby town. He carried a letter and a quiet look in his eyes. "I heard about a child living here," he said to the sheriff who happened to be visiting. "I think I might know where she came from." Word spread quickly, and Clara, who had been feeding Daisy, froze when she overheard. Her heart pounded. Was someone coming to take her away after all? Samuel felt the same chill. He stood on the porch staring at the horizon where the stranger's horse disappeared in the distance. He didn't know what news the man carried, but deep inside, he already knew one thing. He could not imagine his life or his home without Clara anymore. As the sun set over the golden fields, Clara stood beside him quietly. He looked down at her and said softly, "No matter what happens, you'll always have a place here. You understand?" She nodded, her eyes bright with trust. "Yes, Mr. Whitlock." And though the wind blew softly through the fields, the ranch felt still, waiting, holding its breath for what tomorrow might bring. Spring had settled over the Whitlock ranch, painting the fields in bright green and gold. Flowers bloomed near the porch, and the soft hum of bees filled the air. Birds chirped in the early morning, and Clara could hear the distant lowing of cattle as she walked through the fields. Everything about the ranch felt alive, but Clara's heart carried a small, quiet worry. The stranger who had arrived weeks ago had asked questions about her past, and although no one had taken her away yet, the thought of leaving the only home she had ever felt safe in weighed on her. Samuel noticed the tension in her small shoulders. One evening, he found her sitting on the porch steps, her hands clasped around her knees. "Thinking about something?" he asked gently. Clara hesitated. I'm scared someone might take me away," she admitted in a soft whisper. Samuel nodded slowly. "I understand," he said. "But I promise you, nothing will happen here without your best interests in mind. You are safe. You are part of this home, my home." Her eyes shimmered with tears, but she smiled faintly. For the first time, she felt a warmth that seemed stronger than fear. The next morning, a messenger arrived from a nearby town, carrying a letter with official seals. Samuel opened it carefully. The letter explained that the stranger had confirmed Clara's parents' passing many years ago. It mentioned distant relatives, people who might wish to claim her, but it also noted something vital. Clara's happiness and stability were most important. Samuel read the words carefully. feeling a mixture of relief and worry. Finally, he looked down at Clara. "It's official," he said softly. "Your parents are gone. You have no one else who can take care of you. Except me." Clara's hands trembled as she held the locket. "Does that mean I can stay?" she asked quietly. Samuel smiled warmly. "It means you are mine to care for if you want. Not as a charity and not as a daughter." The words made her heart leap. She had never imagined a day when someone could say that to her so gently and mean it so fully. She wrapped her arms around Samuel in a hug, small but full of trust, and he held her close, feeling a bond stronger than anything he had known in years. The townspeople heard of the news soon after. Some came to congratulate Samuel and Clara, bringing small gifts or baked treats. They smiled at the sight of the pair walking together across the fields, Samuel's large hand gently holding her small one. The shy, quiet girl who had once sat alone by the dusty trail now laughed openly, helping to carry baskets of fruit and feed the chickens. She was no longer the trail girl. She was part of the ranch, part of Samuel's life. A local judge, hearing of the situation, came to the ranch to make Clara's adoption official. The ceremony was simple, held on the porch of the house under the warm spring sun. Clara sat on a wooden chair, clutching her locket, while Samuel stood beside her. Martha smiled proudly from the kitchen doorway, and the ranch hands lined up watching silently. When the judge declared Samuel as her legal father, a soft cheer arose from the ranch. Clara's eyes sparkled, and she threw her arms around Samuel's waist. "You're my dad," she whispered. "Yes," he said, voice thick with emotion, "and I always will be." From that day forward, life on the ranch changed in ways that neither Samuel nor Clara could have imagined. Every morning they would ride together to check the fences and feed the animals. Samuel taught her more about horses, cows, and caring for the land. Clara taught Samuel things too: how to notice small details in the clouds, how to make bread rise perfectly, and how to laugh at the little surprises of life. Their lives intertwined like two threads, forming a new, stronger fabric. The seasons passed and Clara grew taller, stronger, and more confident. She played with the ranch dogs, helped Martha in the kitchen, and sometimes even rode alone across the fields, Samuel watching proudly from a distance. She laughed freely, ran through the meadows, and felt the joy of being loved and safe. Samuel noticed how much lighter his own heart had become, how the laughter of a child could chase away the shadows of the past. One late summer afternoon, Samuel and Clara stood on the hill overlooking the ranch. The sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of pink and gold. Clara turned to him and asked softly, "Do you think my mama can see me now?" Samuel's eyes softened. "I think she's watching, Clara, and I think she's happy for you." Clara smiled, holding the locket against her chest. "I hope she knows I'm happy too." "I'm sure she does," Samuel said. "And so am I." Over time, Clara began to understand the meaning of family in a way she never had before. Family wasn't only about blood. It was about care, trust, and shared moments, like brushing a horse's mane together, laughing while baking pies, or sitting silently under the stars, speaking to the past and the present. Samuel had given her this family, and in return, she had given him the joy of living again. Even the townspeople noticed the change. Children who once whispered about the trail girl now waved at her as she rode past. Neighbors came to visit the ranch more often, bringing fresh produce, flowers, or just friendly conversation. Clara's presence brought a gentle warmth to the community, a reminder that even the smallest soul could change the life of those around her. Martha often said to Samuel in the evenings, "I never thought I'd see you smile like this again. You've both healed each other, you know." Samuel would nod silently, sometimes holding Clara close as she slept in her small bedroom upstairs. The house, once quiet and empty, now pulsed with life and laughter. The sound of Clara's footsteps, her soft voice, and the laughter of horses in the yard became a comforting rhythm that filled every corner. Years later, when Clara had grown into a kind, strong young woman, she would often look back at that day on the trail, dusty, lonely, and uncertain, and remember the fear and hope that had lived together in her small heart. She would remember the soft, steady hands of Samuel Whitlock and the warmth of the ranch that had become her home. She knew that she had been found at the right time by the right person, and that her life had changed forever because someone had chosen to love her. And Samuel, now older and softer, would often sit on the porch with her, watching the sun set over the fields. He would think about the lonely days after losing his wife and daughter, and he would realize that he had been given a second chance at family. Clara had brought light back into his life, laughter back into his heart, and hope where there had once only been sorrow. One evening, as fireflies danced in the fields and the ranch lay quiet under a blanket of stars, Clara sat on the porch beside Samuel. She looked up at him and whispered, "Thank you for finding me." Samuel placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "No," he said softly, "I didn't find you, Clara. We found each other." And so, the lonely trail girl and the wealthiest cowboy became a true family, bound not by blood, but by love, trust, and the promise of shared life. The ranch was no longer just land, and it was a home, a place of belonging, a testament to hope, and the quiet magic of second chances. The wind whispered through the fields, carrying the warmth of summer, the laughter of a child, and the soft, steady heartbeat of a man who had learned to love again. And somewhere in the quiet stars above, Clara's mother seemed to watch and smile, knowing that her little girl had finally found the home she deserved.